All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, brothers and sisters, friends and enemies, thank you for checking out We Act Radio, DC's only independent radio station and best social justice station in the nation's capital, according to this Washington City paper, but what do they know? I'm joined in the studio here. It's an honor, it's a privilege. I'm just so grateful because, you know, sometimes we have trouble acknowledging greatness when it's in our presence and when we see it. Like, we always want to look at people who have done things that we read about, we hear about, we watch on television, but when the people are actually doing the work in the midst of the actions, because people oftentimes, you know, forget that Malcolm wasn't praised that much when he was breathing. Martin wasn't praised at the time that he died. You know, there was churches that wouldn't allow Martin Luther King in. Do you understand that? There was churches that wouldn't let Martin Luther King in it. Black churches. We have a problem oftentimes with acknowledging it when we are in the midst of a great revolution, as Martin Luther King said. And so I'm here with a Palestinian Muslim American activist, born and raised in Brooklyn, and every Islamophobe's greatest nightmare. And you might know her along with Tamika Mallory and Carmen Perez. She co-founded the Women's March, which is probably one of the largest events ever to take place in the nation's capital. She's here today because she has a book. She's now an author. She added notches to her belt. A memoir of love and resistance, author of We Are Not Here to Be Bystanders. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, friends and enemies, please help me and welcome Miss Linda Sarsour.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored to be here.
All right, I hope I did some justice with that. You know,
you're doing all right.
Yeah, because you go hard, you know, because like the brothers ain't carrying their weight when it comes to with y'all sisters, you know. And I'm gonna say that now. The brothers not really carrying their weight when it comes to how the system has circled the wagons around you guys, and how you guys never ever gave an inch. You know, I just want to take my hat off to you because I was rooting for you guys all the time, and every time I've seen you, you've always been on point. Your whole crew's been on point. Y'all was like the squad before the squad.
That's right. That's what
y'all were the squad.
Right. Tell them. Squad before the squad.
So let's take it from the top. Let's see. The first thing is being unapologetic. You said is a journey. Where did your journey begin? Being unapologetic.
I mean, my journey is, you know, I'm born and raised in Brooklyn, and you try to find your identity as a young person. You want to know who you are, how are you going to project yourself to the world. And my beginning of my journey was literally when I was 7 years old. My parents took me to Palestine, and my mom was like, get up, you got to go meet, you know, you got to go meet your uncle. And I went with her, and she took me on this long trip, ended up at an Israeli prison where I met my uncle for the first time, my mother's brother. And, you know, you're a young kid, you're from the States, you're like, must be a criminal, must have done something wrong. Right. You know, that's what we learn in America at that age. And my mom was like, he did nothing wrong. He was walking home from work with some, you know, other male Palestinian colleagues, gets arrested, no due process, no lawyers, it was a military tribunal, indefinite detention. And so my mom sat me down, and that was the first time I got to understand that I'm Palestinian, that I have a blood of an oppressed people, a resilient people that runs through my vein. And that started to solidify kind of my journey into becoming this unapologetic Palestinian American, understanding like I have generations of Palestinians before me and after me who count on me. And of course, 9/11 was that another moment of me to solidify my unapologeticness, particularly around my faith and being a Muslim. You know, you go from being an ordinary New Yorker, nobody looks at you twice, on September 10th. And then on September 11th, you become part of the suspect class where your neighbors don't trust you anymore and people are looking at you in different ways. And now you're feeling like someone is basically criminalizing you for something that you had absolutely nothing to do with. And that was another kind of radicalizing moment for me where I became even more unapologetic. So I started with the being unapologetically Palestinian, and then the Muslim part comes in, and then you add that all together with the Brooklyn, and then that makes me today.
Yeah, I think Dr. Cornel West said the niggerization, because black people have been experiencing that before September 10th. You know, it's funny, September 11th, I chose to ride the metro because I wanted to be around people to see how people was processing this thing, because I could have drove, but I wanted to get a feel of what was going on. And I get on the bus, and the bus driver says, "No fare today. Let's get on, brother. Revolution is here." Yeah, wow. You know, I'm on the back of the bus. It's like you know, pipeheads talking about Afghanistan. We know that's where they make all the opium. You know what I'm saying? And like most people couldn't point out Afghanistan, but pipeheads know where it was coming from. And then I get to I get downtown. I'm on K Street transferring buses, and I saw people running down the street, like white people in suits and briefcases running like it was like the Independence Day with Will Smith. You know,
wow,
everyone's trying to get out of DC. Like that's what was happening, and I'm seeing tanks coming in. You know, I was like, wow. And then I see this brother. I think he was a bike courier, and his feet was kicked up on the sidewalk, on a bench on the sidewalk, smoking a J, smoking a spliff, and it was not legal yet in DC. Because he's like, I know anybody gonna fuck with me today, you know. And so I thought that was like how differently we were responding. Here's this brother smoking a joint, relaxing, with his feet kicked up, and white people in briefcases and suits running, you know, trying to get out of town. Processing that, how did you see 9/11 differently?
I mean, I'm a New Yorker. I'm born and raised in New York City. And at the time I was at Kingsborough Community College, which is on Manhattan Beach, right across from Manhattan. And I literally walked out of my college campus, and people forget, like, I'm old. There was no Twitter. There was no Facebook. You didn't know what was going on. And there was even no, we didn't even have like the little flat screen TVs in the universities. Now everybody can kind of know what's going on. And I walked out of my college campus, there was like literally paper falling from the sky, like little pieces of paper. You know, it's like you said, it felt like doomsday. And of course, you know, you later on during the day, you find out, you know, a horrifying thing happened. I mean, 3,000 of our fellow Americans died on that day. And people forget that Muslims also died in the World Trade Center. Close to 70 Muslims also worked in that building. Many restaurant workers as well. And we were mourning like everybody else, because anybody could have been there. You know, we could have been there. Your child could have been there. You know, like the idea that somehow we were separated from the sadness and the sorrow and the trauma that event did to New York City and really to our whole country. All of a sudden, we went again from being mourning for the people who passed and being a city that was targeted by terrorists to being blamed for the terrorist attack that had nothing to do with our community. And when I say blamed, I don't mean just like rhetoric. I'm talking about all levels of law enforcement descending on our communities. We're talking about raids on coffee shops, Arab-speaking owned coffee shops, you know, going to the buildings, pulling out people for things like name sharing. There was just literally, you know, immediately NYPD got into kind of, as they say, into formation with their intelligence program. Their intelligence program became oftentimes larger and more resourced than the Federal Bureau of Investigations, specifically targeting Muslim Americans and specifically Muslims who come from Arab countries. And that was our experience. Like, imagine you're a kid from Brooklyn, you see all these men being dragged out of buildings and put on the floor, and seeing moms crying in the streets for their husbands or kids for their fathers. Like, that's what I witnessed. And that was like another moment, which is why I call my book that I wrote, We Are Not Here to Be Bystanders. I was like, this is not all right. This is not okay. I'm just not going to sit around and let this happen to my people without me putting my voice out there and doing something about it. And so I started translating. So here I am, you know, I was a pretty sheltered kid. You know, my parents were pretty good about sheltering us from like violence and, you know, trauma and things like that. And I started translating for these women and ended up finding myself in detention centers in New Jersey, in downtown Manhattan, you know, kids having to hold like a little kid's hand because his mom is too traumatized to even pay attention to her kid in the moment. You know what I mean? And here I am, like, being in situations I never thought I'd find myself in. Not that I didn't know there was you know, already injustice in America, but me personally, like, I never experienced it on such a close level. And that's what happened to us in the post 9/11 era.
You know, one of the things that pains me when we're having these conversations about 9/11 is that they very rarely, if ever, acknowledge one simple fact. The majority of the hijackers were from Saudi Arabia. America has no problem with Saudi Arabia.
Oh, the hypocrisy is outrageous.
Then to justify, you know, the war on terror, they go to Afghanistan and Iraq, but don't touch Saudi Arabia. Don't even criticize Saudi Arabia. Still sell weapons to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has the largest embassy in Washington, D.C.
Take gifts from them, dance with them.
You know, excuse them assassinating a journalist.
Absolutely.
You know, that's Saudi Arabia. And we need to acknowledge that. You know, and then of course you have to acknowledge that the first flight out of America was the family of Osama bin Laden. And so there's, 9/11 is still a lot of questions there on what exactly and who was involved and responsible for that. Just want to put it out there because we have these conversations as if it was just these irate Muslims. Well, they don't ever talk about what terrorist acts America commits. When we hear about weddings being bombed from a drone attack, when we hear about civilian casualties and collateral damage, all those are acceptable language.
Absolutely. I mean, I tell people all the time, obviously there is never any reason to justify mass violence or any type of violence against any communities. And to your point, the first week of Donald Trump's presidency, he announces the Muslim ban.
Right.
I don't support the banning of anybody from anywhere. And let's be clear that the people of Saudi Arabia ain't the Saudi Arabian government. Everybody deserves to immigrate and be with their loved ones. But to your point, if the idea was about national security, if the idea was about you're picking countries where we should be quote unquote afraid of the people, why are you choosing countries, some of the poorest countries in the world, countries where we don't really have any necessarily tense relationships with? And to your point, we, for example, sold the largest arms deals to Saudi Arabia, and what are they doing with it? They're killing innocent Yemenis, which Yemen is one of the poorest countries in the world. And so for me, I don't ever try to explain away why things happen, but there needs to be some context. To your point, we went to Iraq based on some lies about weapons of mass destruction. There were no weapons of mass destruction. And what ends up happening is we killed 650,000 Iraqis there. We decimated an entire nation. We created instability. And what happens when you create instability? It becomes a breeding ground for other groups to come in. And so when we think about, our foreign policy, what we've done for decades is we've literally interfered, decimated, terrorized brown people across the world, engaged in regime change. And I'm not saying some of those regimes weren't dictatorships or people that, needed to be dealt with somehow, but it's not our place.
Yeah, we're not the police of the world.
Yeah, we're not the police of the world. And so I think the American people just really need to be well informed about what our role is in the world, right? And that we are creating a national security threat to ourselves when we should be worrying about getting health care for all our people, building schools in Chicago, in Southwest District of Baltimore. You know what I mean? The fact that right now we're in a presidential election and people are debating with me talking about how you going to pay for health care? How you going to pay for that? And I'm like, why are you always penny pinching my health care? But nobody ever penny pinched the trillions of dollars we've spent on wars.
Exactly.
As an American, that's what I'm saying. As an American, I'm the one that pays the taxes. I should be able to decide whether I want my tax dollars to go to infrastructure or to schools in Chicago versus going to kill brown people that ain't never wanted to kill me.
Yeah, and in Washington, D.C., I have to interject that we have taxation without representation, which is unconstitutional and basically tyranny. The country was founded fighting over that principle. I want to put that out there. You said that Palestine is the longest occupation in world history. That is your culture. I submit that the African Holocaust was probably the longest in world history. So we have so much in common. Pointing back, I have on our wall here in our studio, we have the iconic image of this young brother with dreads, with the flag on his chest, throwing the tear gas back at the police that was thrown at him. And while we was in Ferguson, we was getting texts, we was getting tweets from brothers and sisters in Palestine that was telling us how to deal with tear gas. Take your shirt, drench it with the, and wrap it,
Wash your eyes with milk.
Yeah, throwing milk in your eye. That information was, was key to a lot of us being able to move forward, That's when I realized that our struggles, there's a Venn diagram. And I just want to know, in your opinion, why you don't think that so many struggles around the world haven't recognized the Venn diagram and the commonality of our struggles?
Because white nationalism, white supremacy in general has figured out how to divide us and pit us up against each other. And that's why, for me, I've always been an intersectional organizer before people thought it was cool to be talking about intersectionality.
Right.
And I've said this many times on many public stages that as a Palestinian, I believe that my liberation is connected to the liberation of Black people. Palestine is never going to be free. Black people ain't free around the world. And Black people in particular, there's a deep sense of a long-standing, centuries-old, history of struggle, of resilience, and figuring out how to help build the political power of Black people towards Black liberation is a commitment of mine. And if that means that my people gotta wait a little bit, that's fine. Because that's the thing here. Everybody wants to beat the other group. And I'm always like, how am I as a Muslim Palestinian supposed to get rights in America if the people who were here way before we ever got here still don't got rights? And for me, I have this quote by an Aboriginal woman named Leela Watson that I use often when I'm training young people in particular. And it speaks to me in the way that I organize. And she says, if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come here because you believe that your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. And so for me, if we all have that mentality, if you have that mentality, then I can see so for example, as you said, like I'm a Palestinian woman and I had a teenage son at the time when Mike Brown got shot. Something moved me. I was sitting in New York City. I said, this is not right. I said, this young man gets shot unarmed. That's one problem. The second problem was he was left out in the hot sun in August for 4 hours, bleeding on the street. Nobody checked his vitals. They didn't let his mother touch him. And then after the 4 hours, they pick him up and they throw him into the back of an SUV like a bag of rocks. And I'm sitting here thinking, this is not Palestine. This is the United States of America. I did the same. I went to Ferguson because there was something about that told me that child is my child. And that is unjust, what is happening. And that we are not here to be bystanders. And I went to Ferguson to bear witness and to be able to come back and say, no, I saw those young people in Ferguson. You know what? They were absolutely angry. You know what? That was righteous anger. And instead of asking us why the kids in Ferguson were angry, I want to know why you're not angry. I want to know why you're worried more about a cracked window of a CVS than you are about a dead young man on the streets of Ferguson. So that was another part of my radicalizing moment, watching people online trying to justify, well, what happened? Did he steal cigarillos? It don't matter if he stole cigarillos. Let's just say he went in there and stole the whole store. You cannot justify the extrajudicial murder of a young unarmed boy walking in the streets of whether it be Ferguson, whether it be Crown Heights, whether it be Baltimore, whether it be Washington, D.C. And that was another moment where I was like, here we go again, dehumanizing people, criminalizing a corpse. Mike Brown ain't around to defend himself. No,
dead men tell no tales. And on our front door, we have a quote from Ida B. Wells. It's Women's History Month. And thank you for making history now. She says that murders, those who commit the murders write the reports.
That's right.
That's Ida B. Wells. And the story the police gave made no sense. A young man's walking down the street and decides to attack a police officer. He's on his way to college.
In all the stories, Eric Garner,
like, what?
Ramali Graham. If you go to any story of any of the unarmed Black men and women that have been killed, the police always got another story. And unfortunately for us, what happens is because you kill the defendant who is not able to defend themselves, oftentimes the story of the police is the story that prevails. For us, around Eric Garner, which was another moment for me, I don't know if you remember this, but in 2015, me, Carmen, and Tamika, we marched from New York City all the way to Washington, D.C. for
I want to talk about that. Because I know finish your point, but I want to go back to what that experience was like.
And for us, it was, the impetus was, Mike Brown and Eric Garner both get killed in the same summer, just a few weeks apart. Both cops are not indicted. And the street in New York City just lit up. And I remember being part of a conversation that Tamika was, and there was all these young people around us being like, ain't nobody give a shit about us. Nobody cares about us. And imagine, you're a young, 16, 17-year-old young Black man, and you're sitting basically saying, ain't nobody care about us. That is the kind of stuff that radicalizes me, because that is not right. And Tamika literally was like, we got to do something crazy, like something that people won't expect us to do. Not the usual, just go outside and rally in front of the police department or the mayor's office and the stuff that people always do, which is, of course, important. She was like, we marching from New York City to Washington, D.C. And I was like, that's a long march. And the young people were with it.
That's a real march.
That's a real march. And the young people were with it because they knew that you have to sometimes go to drastic measures for people to pay attention. Like if I'm willing to put 250 miles on my knees, then that means I'm serious about it. That means I'm committed to this cause. And, so we marched from New York City, from Staten Island, where Eric Garner was killed, all the way down Route 1 to Washington, D.C. And it was so crazy because in every city that we went to Trenton, New Jersey, we went to Philadelphia, you know, just kind of went all the way down. And in every city, we would do like these little teach-ins or little gatherings, being at churches, kind of getting local community to join and kind of figure out what we're doing and whatnot. And in every city, never failed, there would be at least 5, 6, 7 families that would show up and be like, we are the mother of, we are the brother of, we are the sister of, young people mostly who were killed at the hands of police, the overwhelming majority of them unarmed. And when we were marching also, we ended up going through Rising Sun, Maryland, which is the home of really the start of the KKK. And everywhere, and we have video footage of all this because we documented our whole trip. I mean, Confederate flags everywhere.
It sounds like a documentary.
There's actually a young man named Ramin who's still working on this documentary called Get Up, Stand Up, and Confederate flags everywhere. Now, mind you, most of the people that marched with us were New Yorkers, right? So in New York, we got a racist police system and all this stuff, but we don't really see Confederate flags and that kind of stuff. That's all in the books that we read. Confederate flags everywhere, cars that were like blowing black smoke at us, calling us the N-word, because obviously a lot of the people that were with us were black. The experiences that these young people were feeling, they were out in full force. And in fact, it was so sinister and crazy that there was this little purple cart, like a little, one of those like cotton candy, they make like cotton candy in the back or whatever, like you see at the festivals, and it was called Cupcake Cart, but instead of C, it was K, so it was KKK.
Oh wow!
I mean, watching people like yell at us from their homes, and we ended up at one point at Lincoln University, and I remember the kids just breaking down. They were college students. It was like the trip accumulated and all that experience that they received. You just start bringing up all the generational trauma. Like there were kids telling us, like, is this what our ancestors went through? Like the dehumanization, that they experienced during that trip. And it was one of the most meaningful experiences of my whole entire life. A lot of people talk about the Women's March, and that was cool, but nothing like that March to Justice from New York City and Washington.
I can dig it, and I hope you guys had some sort of security detail with you, so you wasn't just out there exposed to these elements, because oftentimes we don't think about protecting ourselves on a level that it needs to be. But talk about some of the dehumanization of stop and frisk that was in New York, and we just saw Bloomberg bail out the election. It was failed to purchase. His attempts to purchase the election failed, but he was successful in derailing a lot, and also exposing a lot of sellouts as well. I'm ashamed to say that our mayor was part of that as well. But talk about that, and then talk about your own personal interaction with Bloomberg.
I would say that one upside to Super Tuesday was Mike Bloomberg was out, and I will say that while I'm very
Thank you, Elizabeth Warren.
While I'm very disappointed in some folks who did give him an endorsement, that's also power of movement. I mean, Elizabeth Warren, obviously eviscerated him on the debate stage. The movement folks were online. We were everywhere he was. We were not going to let him forget that he literally escalated a program that stopped and frisked millions of young black and brown people in New York City. And it's not just about the stop and frisk. I'm talking about that ends up putting people in pretrial, detention, and reminds me of stories of Khalif Browder, a young man allegedly who stole a book bag and who sat almost 3 years in a pretrial because that's how overly overwhelmed our incarceration system is in New York City. He also spied on Muslims and had a specific program called the Demographics Unit of the NYPD Intelligence, that their whole job was to map the Muslim community, literally. The places we prayed, the places
and work with the CIA.
It was actually orchestrated by a senior level CIA operative.
Which is supposed to be illegal because they're not supposed to be conducting domestic.
Exactly. But when it comes to the Muslims, all those rules go out the window because for them, everything's a national security loophole. But Tom Galati, a chief intelligence officer at the NYPD, in a deposition said, this program did nothing for me. It led to no leads around terrorism, and all we did was psychological warfare on an entire community in New York City. You stop trusting people at the mosque. Like, you be praying in the mosque, you're like, is this guy next to me, is he an informant or is he my people? Like, you don't know. Someone's asking you a question like, at a coffee shop, like, hey, what do you think about what's happening in Palestine right now? What's happening in Syria? And people are like, instead of having a conversation with your brother or your sister, you're like, why are you asking me that? Who you work for? So you become mistrustful. And what happens when you know this in a community, when there's no trust, you break down the fabric of the type of power we're trying to build together. So the NYPD is a disruptive force for Black and brown people, for Muslim communities who, you know, are all of those things. And Mayor Bloomberg justified all of that. He stood up. He actually, at one point in an article between me and him, he stood up and called us leaders of special interest groups. And I'm like, special interest, bro? Like, what are you talking about? You're the man with the billions of dollars. I don't got no billions of dollars. My only special interest is my civil liberties that are supposed to be apparently in the Constitution. And you're the one taking that from us. And you're calling me special interest? But he's mad because we beat him in New York City. We passed landmark police reform legislation that he was funding against, and he vetoed us the first time, and we went back again to the New York City Council, and we were able to get a veto-proof majority. So he knew that your money can take you only so far. You can't beat the will of the people, and you can't beat a Black and brown coalition. And in New York City, we were able to show the country that when you get together, you build people power, you stay united. You don't let the, you know, they were trying to pin up the stop and frisk issue against the Muslim surveillance. They were like, all right, fine, we can talk to you about stop and frisk, but don't you bring up those Muslims at the spine. That's a whole other thing. And Black and brown people rejected that. They were like, this is racial and religious profiling, and we're not going to deal with either of them.
I'm glad you guys did that, because oftentimes we compromise far too much. But he's on record for saying, I want you to give context to this. Bloomberg said, hell no, not on my watch. Where'd that come from?
That was for another campaign that we worked on in New York City. You know, in New York City, 1 out of every 8 New York City public school students is Muslim. So that means 13% of our public school population are Muslim children. So when the holidays come around, the kids don't go to school. And that means most of the schools, you might as well shut them down, because we have some areas where we're really highly concentrated. And so we started a campaign in New York called Recognition, Inclusion, and Respect to basically call on the New York City Department of Education to basically honor and close schools for Muslim holidays, just like we do for Christian holidays and Jewish holidays. You know, we're not asking for any favors. We just want to have the same recognition.
That's right.
And Bloomberg was like, hell no. He didn't care. We hundreds of thousands of petitions. We had the UFT supporting us, the Principals Union. We had Black and brown organizations. We had Jewish groups and Hindu groups and all kinds of religious groups that were with it, because they saw. We had the statistics. We did the work. Bloomberg was in a meeting with me. He was literally sitting right across from me. He just got up in the middle, all annoyed, like we were asking him for something that he couldn't do. So outrageous to him. He got up and he was like, hell no. He's like, I don't care what you do, what you say, what kind of work you do. We are not closing. I'm not closing another day of school, not under my tenure. So he's like, you might as well wrap it up. And he, unfortunately, there was nothing else we could do, because in New York, he's the boss. The mayor is the boss of there's no school board or other people we can kind of get around him. And we had to basically close our campaign down for about 2 years before, re-energizing it for a new mayoral election, as you know, in 2013, because Mayor Bloomberg was my mayor for 12 years. He was only supposed to be the mayor for 8 years, but because he's Bloomberg and got a couple of $1 billion in his pocket, he was able to buy himself another term. And
for the record, for those who are listening, he also sat on a lawsuit for the exonerated 5 during his entire tenure. They wasn't awarded their settlement to after he was out of office. I guess it was also something that he wasn't willing to do on his watch. We have just a few minutes left, and you said that the Autobiography of Malcolm X was transformative for you. It was transformative for me. It was one of my favorite books. It was probably the first book that really changed the trajectory of my life. And I think people oftentimes minimize the effect and potential that one book can have on a person's life. Tell us about the Autobiography of Malcolm X and what it meant to you.
It's exactly that. It's the book that changed my life and also helped me get on this unapologetic journey. Malcolm X is a very underestimated human being in the history of the United States of America, and for a lot of marginalized people and Black people, he was unapologetically Black. Like, so unapologetic that it like brings tears to my eyes about how he saw Black people as worthy and whole people, deserving of dignity and respect. He was also unapologetically Muslim, and I appreciated the transformation of him going to Mecca and being able to look around and say, I could be in sisterhood and brotherhood with Arab people, with Southeast Asian and South Asians and others, because Islam is an anti-racist religion, and it does center the dignity of Black people too. And Malcolm was able to articulate that in a way that was really transformative for me. But he also wasn't perfect. And that's why, you know, when working on I'm very committed to the criminal justice reform movement, and that's kind of where I come from. And when I think about the journey that Malcolm, was on, I always think to myself, how many other Malcolms do we got sitting in prisons right now? How many brilliant, articulate, charismatic, committed people are sitting in a prison right now, and their voices are not being able to be heard in their communities because we have them in cages. And that was who Malcolm was. He was a man who made mistakes in his life, and he wasn't perfect, and he was flawed.
And he kept growing and
evolving
to the very end,
to the end.
Kept reevaluating his position, and that's what really resonated.
That's
with me.
Leadership, and that's the thing. Like, no one's absolute. There were things maybe that I believed 20 years ago that I'm different about right now, because that's what a real leader does. A real leader evolves and grows and learns, and there was something special about Malcolm. There was like any word he said, it could have been like one sentence. Everything was profound. Everything was calculated. Everything. And what I loved about him, he never cowered. He didn't care. He wasn't trying to appease nobody. He said, "Listen, here, you get this. You take it or you leave it." And I really appreciated that. And it's me and Tamika and Carmen, and Tamika and me in particular, just very committed to this idea. Like you saw, we were vilified, dehumanized. You know, people were smearing us.
I was trying to sing y'all strength. Y'all was stood up strong.
And you know what? We still here.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why I believe we're still here, because we didn't cower. I wasn't going to give up my values and my principles. I wasn't going to allow other people to define me or define who Tamika was. And we withstood that. And we're here today. We're still doing the work.
I'm sure you guys were offered some things.
Yeah,
Malcolm was offered some things when the FBI came to his house, and he had the foresight of recording that. So I'm acknowledging. I have an idea of what you've gone through, and all respect due.
I appreciate you. And so anyway, a lot of these stories and questions you're asking are actually in my book. So hopefully folks get my book. It's called "We Are Not Here to Be Bystanders," and that's really the call to action.
Please do not purchase this book at Amazon. Get it in your local bookstore.
Local independent bookstores.
So we just got a few minutes left. Well, real quickly, did you see the documentary on Netflix for Malcolm?
I sure did.
Thumbs up, thumbs down?
I think listen, thumbs up.
Thumbs up.
And check it out. Who Killed Malcolm X? I mean, I feel sad about just the whole ordeal.
I learned a lot in that, though.
I absolutely learned a lot. I was pretty shocked by the stuff that was in there. So definitely check it out.
DC's brother actually behind that as well. So my great inspiration for my profession is James Lipton from Inside the Actor Studio. And for those who don't know, James Lipton just passed away this week. He's my greatest inspiration, journalistic hero. Him and Gary Webb, my greatest journalist heroes. And he would close out all of his interviews with a round of questions, the same set 10 questions. And for the first time, I'm going to ask those 10 questions, and I'm honored that this is the person that's the subject of those questions. And so this show and this segment is dedicated to the memory of James Lipton. Rest well. Job well done as well. All right. So, what is your favorite word?
Freedom.
What is your least favorite word?
Helplessness.
Okay. What turns you on?
Intellectual conversations.
What turns you off?
Hypocrisy, mediocrity.
What sound or noise do you love?
I love the sound of water and waves on the beach.
Okay. What sound or noise do you hate?
White liberals talking on national television.
That's the 6 corporations control most of what we see here and read. All right. What is your favorite curse word?
I'm going to keep it clean because, I say shit all the time.
You say shit is flexible.
Yeah, it's flexible.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Just want to be a high school English teacher.
A high school English teacher. Okay, cool beans. High school English teacher changed my life. What profession would you not like to do?
Be a cop.
Ah, there it is. Officer friendly. If heaven, and this is the question that let me know that James Lipton was a genius. He was, an atheist. He didn't believe in God. So rather than saying, if you believe in God, which would be offensive to a believer, he sensitized it to make it digestible. He says, if heaven exists, which is basically saying the same thing. You can't believe in God without believing in heaven, the way the story is presented to us. But he says, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you get at the pearly gates?
I want God to say, Ahlan wa sahlan, which means welcome in Arabic.
Lena Sarsour, welcome. Continued success on your terms. The book is here. It is a memoir of love and resistance. We are not here to be bystanders.
And we are not.
And it's Women's History Month, so let me close with a quote with Angela Davis, who says that I am no longer accepting the things that I cannot change. I am going to change the things that I cannot accept. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, friends and enemies, do something. We're not here to be bystanders.
I appreciate you.